There are four phases to retirement planning. There's the pre-go, there's the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go phases. And here to talk with me about the third phase of this retirement planning exercise is Dana Anspach. She is the CEO and founder of Sensible Money. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Bob. This is exciting to talk about in some ways because we focus so much on the early part of retirement planning for retirement and then the initial go-go phase. And I don't know that we place enough focus on the slow-go phase, which is a really, in some cases, long period of our lives.
Yeah. So we've already talked about the first two phases, the pre-go and the go-go phases. But let me start here for a second. When I think about these phases, sometimes I put them in my brain as distinct periods of time marked by ages, like 65 to 75 as go-go, 75 to 85 as slow-go, and 85 and older as no-go. But that's not always the case, is it?
It is not always the case. I mean, we could use averages, and like so many things that involve averages, there's a lot of people that fall outside of, that average number. So, when I think of pre-go, it's really when do you get serious about your retirement planning? As I probably shared in a previous video we did, my pre-go phase will overlap with my go-go phase because I want to work and stay involved until 70. And so I know I need to do some of those go-go activities along the way. For some people, it is more abrupt. They're coming out of corporate America. They work till a specific age, they stop, and then the go-go phase starts. And for some people, that starts at 55. For some people, 65. In some cases, not till 70. And the same applies to the slow-go years. I think in general, I see it begin around the time one's required minimum distribution starts, so around 75 now, mid 70s. But I have seen people who started to experience slow-go in their late 60s, and people like an article I just read on Warren Buffett in the Wall Street Journal who don't experience it until their mid 90s.
Hard to imagine that Warren Buffett is just entering his slow-go years now at age 93, 4.
94. So he just announced they did an exclusive interview in the Wall Street Journal. I believe it was in May of 25. And I read it with fascination. He said, direct quote, "At 94, I'm finally feeling my age." And so we all only hope to be that lucky, right? He went on to describe how he could see the energy level some of his younger in their 60s colleagues had, that he felt like, his energy level just wasn't there anymore. And so he felt like it was time. Now he still wants to be engaged and go to work, but he could definitely feel that things were changing. And I can only hope that at 94, that is the first time I really experience, an awareness of slowing down. But for a lot of people, it happens earlier. We have a client in her late 60s right now, and I believe due to some medical conditions and perhaps medications, there is, some serious challenges. The decision-making ability isn't the same as it used to be, and she's decided she needs to move to be closer to family and have people that that care about her. In her case, is her children, be there to help her out through this phase. And so we don't know, right, when it's going to start for us. But I would say most of the time we see it begin sometime in our mid 70s.
Yeah. So in some cases, you could say you'll know it when you feel it, when you start to maybe feel some limitations, perhaps that you didn't experience when you were in your go-go years.
Yeah, and I think of slow go as you're still, cognitively able to make your decisions that you need to make. You're still physically able to manage most of the things that you need to manage. So that to me is what would distinguish slow go from no go. Like no go is where you need assistance either physically or with financial decision making or other decision making. Whereas in the slow go phase, you're just literally slowing down, right? Maybe all of that travel that you wanted to do early in retirement. Now you think about the overseas flight and you go, you know what? I've done that a few times. I just don't have the energy for that again. Or the long distance drive across country. And you might think, no, that's not for me. I often see people, for example, who had the RV lifestyle for many years. And then when slow go happens, they decide it's time to sell the RV and stay in one place. Or people that had two homes, and they may not be traveling to the second home as frequently. And so when slow go begins, they may decide at that point to sell the second location and reside in one place all year long. So it again, it happens differently for each of us, but I do think we are still, able to manage our affairs and manage our daily lives pretty much on our own. Just we maybe don't have the same energy level that we used to have at that
Yeah.
phase.
I've already picked out the Winnebago for my cross country trips. I finally found the one. So I'm excited as all heck.
That sounds like fun. National parks, is that going to be the
There's over
plan?
400 national parks, Dana, and wouldn't it be fun to like check off all of them, at least the major ones? So,
I think it would be fun.
yeah. So when I think about the last time we talked about the go-go phase, we talked about the need to plan ahead. So now let's assume someone is in their slow go years. The time to execute on some of those plans are probably at hand now, and it might be legal documents or healthcare documents or other documents.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect time to make sure all your estate planning documents are in order. Often we do those perhaps as part of retirement. We updated our will and a trust if we have one, and a durable power of attorney and our medical or healthcare power of attorneys. But it may have been many years since you did that, and the estate laws may have changed. Your family situation may have changed. Perhaps there were people you named in those documents, and that wouldn't quite be the right person to be your executor or your successor trustee anymore. So I think it could be a really good time to revisit all of those documents. There are also things like trusted contacts that you can add to your financial institutions. Now, a trusted contact does not have the ability to access your funds. They don't have any authority or decision making. But if that institution were to notice any really odd behavior or requests, or if they weren't able to get a hold of you, they would have someone that they could touch base with just to say, hey, can you check in with this person or help us navigate this situation? So that can be a critical step, making sure you have that. I also see challenges with what are called durable powers of attorney versus financial institutions' own limited power of attorney forms. So, as part of estate planning, most attorneys will have you set up a durable power of attorney. You're naming someone, your spouse if you're married, perhaps a family member or a niece or a nephew if you're not married, that can make financial decisions at some point if you're unable to. But if that document was signed long ago, even just a year or two ago, many financial institutions won't accept it. So you turn that document in and they're skeptical. They go, oh, that document was signed a few years ago. We need our own limited power of attorney form signed. And that allows that financial institution to take instructions from this secondary person. And so if you feel like the slowing that's occurring could turn into something where you need someone else to begin making decisions, you may think about adding a limited power of attorney on some of your accounts. Now, it's always a good discussion to have with your attorney. There's a special kind of attorney called an elder care law attorney that you might want to meet with at that stage to really talk through this, because of course, if someone can make financial decisions for you, there's some risk there also.
Yeah, there's an association called, I think, the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, NALA, where you might be able to find
Yes,
someone.
there is, and you should be able to look in your state to find an attorney that has a specialty. There's also a National Association of Fiduciaries. It's called the National Association of Certified Financial Fiduciaries. And, one of the questions that has come up on some of the online webinars I do is, I don't have any heirs. I don't have any close family. What do I do? And in that case, you need to find a professional fiduciary. And that is that person that you can name as your executor, as your successor trustee, as your limited power of attorney. And often if you start with your elder care attorney and work with them, they can help you locate in your state somebody that not a, I mean, it is a person, but it's often a company that has licensed certified fiduciaries that function in this capacity. clearly you probably wouldn't want to just have an individual person. You would want a company so that there's some succession there if that person leaves the business.
Yeah. When I think about going to an elder law attorney too, I also think about not only your durable power of attorney, but your healthcare proxy, maybe your advance directive and living will, maybe your DNR, maybe your HIPAA releases, maybe your MOLS and Pulse. Like, do you see that as necessary for people who are in this slow go phase to get all these documents in order?
Absolutely. It is critical because we never know what's going to happen. And I have to ask you, there was one thing you named in that list, the last thing, a Molson Pulse. What was it?
Yeah, so these are orders to the doctor about life-saving treatment above and beyond. Like, so a DNR would be do not resuscitate, but a Molster or a Pulse, depending on the state that you're in, would actually tell the doctor what treatment you don't want or do want.
Yeah, and I think I know many years ago, um, I had a pulmonary embolism. I was in my mid 30s. I was rather young, but they asked for those documents when I was checked into the hospital. So they said, do you have these documents? And amazingly enough, I did, only because this is what I do for a living. And so, who has these documents at 35 or 36? Almost no one, but it was kind of odd. But they asked for them and they wanted a copy of them on file. And so if you have doctors that you regularly see or, a hospital, you can put these documents on file and that can be a great idea.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk to people about the healthcare proxy, where you have to name someone who would act in your on your behalf if you were incapacitated. Oftentimes, people will say, "Well, I don't want to name my spouse because they would never do right by me. I want to ask someone who has arm's length, maybe a child who's involved in the medical profession or someone, but I don't want someone who is going to not do right by me. Right? It wouldn't make the decision I would make."
It's so true, right? If we're super emotional, it could be really, really difficult to make that decision to withhold life, prolonging care. But if that's that person's wishes, who's the person that will be able to fulfill your wishes at that point? And I know even among myself, I thought through, I have three brothers and a sister, and I kind of thought through before I was married, like, okay, which one of them, right, is the most logical and least emotional who would be able to do this? And that was the one that I named. And so, yeah, you absolutely have to give thought to these things.
So the other thing when I think about the slow go phase is most people want to age in place. Like 90% of people want to stay in the home that they raise their family in. And yet at some point, the home may become unmanageable for whatever reason. And should people think about aging in place or other housing options and when they're in this phase?
Think it's so particular to each individual. So I have a client couple, they're 89. They live in a house with stairs that they bought about a decade ago, but they're still able to navigate those stairs. They still have, all of their cognitive abilities and physical abilities, but they're certainly in the slow go phase. And so for them, they would like to age in place, but they've also provided very clear instructions to their children that if they get to that point where they can't, their children are supposed to put them into a home and go out and live their lives. And so they've been very clear, about that. Um, there are things you can look at, and sometimes your health insurance or long-term care policies can help cover the cost for things like adding grab bars in your bathrooms, along your shower, perhaps adding a ramp if to get in and out of your house, or maybe you need to widen a door if you anticipate needing a wheelchair at some point. So you can certainly look at those kinds of modifications. You can also begin to do your homework on an assisted living facility or where you would like to live one day. I think of, when we really make that decision, we're probably getting closer to the no-go phase. But some people like to be prepared. I did have a client once move into and did all their research and moved into a continuing care community for 1 year and hated it and moved back out. And then they, spent the remainder of their years in a lovely condo that was low maintenance. And they had people come into the home and someone would help do the laundry and someone would help do the cooking as they aged. So it's certainly particular to each of us in terms of maintaining an aging in place in our current or new location like a condo, or really wanting to find a continuing care community to move into.
Yeah. So often when we talk about the slow-go years, we talk about it as if you'll always be a couple, a married couple perhaps, or a partner. But oftentimes death and divorce are part of this phase too, no?
Yeah, certainly. I don't see divorce as much in slow go. Unfortunately, I see divorce in the go go phase. Um, people retire, they realize they just aren't as aligned or they have very different ideas. And so that is not uncommon to see divorce. I have seen very little divorce in the slow go phase. The few times I have seen it, it was it was often what I would call a strategic divorce. So it was designed to help one person, for example, qualify for Medicaid, or one person to be able to go into a, assisted living facility. And each state laws are different. So there's been a few cases where there was a strategic divorce at that age. What is more common is the loss of a spouse. And it is, heartbreaking and not easy to deal with, especially if you had planned a joint retirement. And so I have seen, amazing situations where the surviving spouse was very resilient and, was able to move on. One case comes to mind of a gentleman who lost his wife to esophageal cancer. And, he went on to move into a condo rather than their big home and join a tennis club. And, he traveled to see his grandkids, and, he really found a way to process it, and and still find a way to live a happy, fulfilling life. And so it's not easy, but it's something that you have to be prepared for, that could certainly happen to you at that stage.
Yeah. It seems like research suggests that when more often than not, husbands predecease their wives, that these bouts of isolation and loneliness occur, and having a plan in place to deal with that, whether it's joining a tennis club or the senior center or whatever the case may be, right, is necessary.
It is, yeah. And I've seen, we have several widows who are in this situation. In one case, she moved in with their eldest son, who had, room in the house to create a true mother-in-law, mother suite in their case, not in-law. And that worked wonderfully. So the community comes from being part of the family. In another case, she got really involved in volunteer work, and not the traditional, like, I'm going to go volunteer for an organization, but she had a knack for just meeting people in need, neighbors that needed help moving, people dealing with an elder parent that they needed help with. And so she just was wonderful at networking and finding people who just needed help. And she would just use her time to make other people's lives easier and better. And, again, we might all do that differently, but finding that sense of purpose and finding a community where we feel like we can give back is really important when that happens.
Yeah. Uh, we were talking about documents. I want to go back to something that I think is important. Some people refer to it as a grab and go binder, or others have other ways to think about it. But this notion of having all your documents in one place that's accessible to family, friends, lawyers, doctors, et cetera, is essential.
It is. And on one of our webinars, one of our listeners posted something that I hadn't seen yet. It's called the knock box, NOK box. I'm looking at my notes just to see if I got that right. Yeah, NOK box. And next of kin is what the NOK stands for. And it's a physical box to help organize your documents. Now, I know a lot of us like things digitally, as I do. But I think there could be value to once a year making sure the critical things are in this physical box that you could hand to someone or let them know where it is. I also know of someone who once a year they load all their stuff onto a little thumb drive and mail it off to their executor, which is one of their adult children. So that could be another option. There are some online services. Some of the challenges with some of those, or will they still be in business, if we pass away 20 years from now? So I think there can be some value to having, a physical box that I can look at, and annually doing it on a thumb drive instead.
So I'm sure there's other content that's in your chapter on the SLOGO years that we haven't touched on or not.
I would think some of the other things that show up in the SLOGO years are spending changes. And so, JP Morgan's study shows that spending tends to decline in retirement, particularly around the SLOGO phase. And what often happens is your spending shifts. And so maybe it used to be entertaining or shopping or traveling, and now you may need more support services. I remember one client who, for nearly a decade, I was like, why don't you hire a house cleaner? And she finally did. Unfortunately, part of the initiative for her doing that was her husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so that was taking up more of her time. But we don't need to wait that long if our financial situation supports it. Maybe it's hiring someone to do the landscaping. I tell the story of my own grandpa who passed away at, I can't remember if it was 68 or 69, but he was on a ladder trimming a tree, and the branch took the ladder out, and grandpa fell and broke his neck. And so it's like, why was he on a ladder trimming a tree at that age? He felt fully capable of it, but there's a risk factor too. Can you outsource some of these tasks? I remember a client telling me about an argument that she and her spouse had about cleaning out the gutters. It's like, you know, trying to get him not to go up on the roof to clean out the gutters. And so, there's a point where you may want to outsource some of these things and spend the money on these activities because it reduces your risk. And the people trained to do these things have all the right safety equipment. It's all they do for a living. So they're just less likely to have the kind of accidents that we might have trying to do it ourselves.
You won't find me on anything taller than a step stool.
Me neither, unless it's a ropes course. I actually do like the ropes course where you get to hook yourself into the
Yeah.
harness. They scare me, but I actually like them.
Yeah, if I'm harnessed in, that's fine, but ladders too old. In our last video, we talked about this notion of planning ahead for the next phase. And are there things like I think about a couple things? One is cognitive decline, the potential for dementia of some sort, and also this notion that as we age, 70% of us will have trouble with at least one activity of daily living. Another 35% will enter a nursing home. And of those 35%, 15% will have a stay of 2 years or longer in a nursing home, but you don't know whether you'll fall into that 15% or not. And so there's a lot to plan for, a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty as you head into the no-go phase.
There are, and I think one of the challenges I've realized as I've been reading more about what happens is that the part of our brain that allows for more self-awareness is part of the brain that is shrinking as we age. And so as these behaviors change, along with it, our ability to recognize the changes is also diminished. And it's what makes it so challenging. And so we really need to have that trusted sounding board, family, financial advocate, financial planner, attorney, whoever that may be, that can let us know that something is changing. I think of a client that just the way they handled this situation was just amazing to me. Is he'd been a planner his whole life, and again, right around mid-70s, reached out to us to say that mild cognitive decline was setting in, and he'd gone to his doctor and gotten an official diagnosis. And so we asked, how did you know? And in his case, he had just started to miss some bills, and that was very uncharacteristic. And they say that cognitive decline often shows up first in our financials. So it may be a missed bill. It may be not understanding a statement that used to be very clear to us. It may be not being able to really grasp our insurance renewal terms, something that might happen each year. So those are the kind of things you can start to look out for, and then figure out when those things start, who can you appoint that can help you through these decisions. And it's not easy to recognize these behaviors in ourselves.
But so critical to do it now in the SLOGO phase before it's too late.
It's absolutely critical. And so, one of the challenges, again, is if we don't recognize these changes coming, we can get to the point, and we've all met elders who were in the denial phase, no, I'm fine, and I have clients who come in with stories all the time, or, they know a parent is no longer safe in their home, but that elder parent does not want to leave the home. And so at that point, it's almost like, Denise Kay, who is a consultant here, she helps people locate the appropriate assisted living facilities. She's talked about this concept of, we revert back to having an adolescent mind, but now we have adult rights. And so here we are, acting immature, not, on purpose. We just, our abilities have changed. And so we are obstinate perhaps, and not aware of the risks, and not aware that, we're not able to make those decisions, or not safe anymore. And so that, one of the questions she suggests asking is, ask that person, hey, mom or dad, if you're dealing with a parent, how did you handle your own mom or dad aging? So try to help them remember maybe, what that was like when they were dealing with their own parent. She also suggests something called the therapeutic lie. So if you were dealing with a parent that you needed to, get them out of the house, she had a story of, needing to tell mom or dad that, hey, your house has termites, and so we need to move you out for a few days so they can come, clean it out. And then they were able to move this person to a care facility, and a few days later, the person said, I realized, I'm not going back, am I? And it was okay. And but it just wouldn't have worked if they just told them, and so she calls that the therapeutic lie, and has many examples of when that can be a kind and graceful way to help someone do something that is really needed for their own safety.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about the no-go in our next episode. But one of the things I know you said was it might be the shortest chapter in your book, but I don't think it will be the shortest interview that we do, because you mentioned things like medication management. And I think that is a big issue for folks in their no-go years, as well as things like transportation and caregiving and end-of-life wishes and et cetera. So I can't wait to talk more about that.
I'm sure there will be tons to talk about there, and wish we got to choose how that happens, but we don't.